And of course, you're a reverse upside down spider guard special.
Yeah, I can't fight without clothes on. I don't fight naked people. What are you talking about?
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to talk about pressure. I'm here to talk about longevity in the sport. I'm here to talk about home gyms and training methods with Mike Mahaffey. Mike, welcome to the show. We've been touching base and brushing off of each other for a long time on the internet. I'm glad that we finally managed to meet. Can you give the people a little bit of a sense of who you are and what your relationship to jiu-jitsu is?
Sure. Thanks, Stephan. I'm super excited to be here. I told you before we started recording, and I'm going to drop this in your podcast now, that when I was a white belt in 2006-ish, I was first introduced to some of your instructionals because I was training, but I had a little kid at home and another one on the way, and a lot of my time was spent not in the academy, but in my basement with some buddies training. And so one of my friends brought over one of your instructionals one time, and that was the first time, the first time that I heard about you, and I kind of stoked to be on your show right now. So it's kind of an interesting full circle. My name is Mike Mahaffey, and I live in Lansing, Michigan, and I train out of Magic Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Lansing. We're a combat-based school under Chris and Melissa Hodder. I've been training for about 17 years now in jiu-jitsu. But like you, I know from listening to your show, I had a background in more traditional martial arts since I was a kid.
What else did you do?
I started in Taekwondo like every other kid in the 80s. And then when I went to college at Michigan State University, I switched over to the MSU Karate Club because I found the Karate Club, I was looking for something I felt was more practical. And at the time, in 1989, that was a lot more practical.
What style of karate? Or karate?
Korean. Yes. No, not. So we were called MSU Karate Club, but we're actually Korean. We were Dongsudo.
Okay.
But our head coach took influence from everywhere. He'd done a bunch of other stuff. He'd done some judo. He had boxed. He had done, all of that. And we, competed a lot and went all over Michigan to fight. And that was that for about 20 years. And then I first heard about jiu-jitsu like everybody else in the early 90s when the UFCs came along. Trained for about a year, like in 94 at some startup place in Michigan. That fell through, and then got back into it in 06. And that's been my main gig ever since.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's fair. Chuck Norris was a Tang Sudo guy, and Chuck Norris has been quite associated with jiu-jitsu over the years. So you're just following in the footsteps of Chuck Norris.
Right. Exactly. I can't say I'm as tough as Chuck Norris, but it's not a bad person to follow, I suppose.
So you mentioned that when you were a white belt and just getting started, that you're doing a lot of training in the home gym. I think this is really interesting. I mean, I've done the same thing. I wish I had pictures of my first home gym, which was a shitty basement apartment. And we put down three by 3 1 meter puzzle mats. So we had basically 9 feet by 9 feet of puzzle mats in the kitchen. It'd be really tight up against the cupboards. You'd be rolling and you'd be putting your feet up against the edge of the sink or trying to force your partner's head into the kitchen cupboard doors. And I can't believe I didn't get any photos of this. I should have immortalized it. But that was during a time when I was super crazy busy and just did not have time. And for a while of that, didn't have any money to train. But I had mats and I had friends. And it turns out that you really fundamentally just need mats and friends. And if you have access to the internet or a friend with pirated VHS tapes, as I'm sure your friend had, then...
Oh, no, he didn't pirate them. He bought them from you.
Oh, no. Yeah, of course he did. Of course he did.
No, he had the app. He had a smartphone. It was like 06, 07. Okay. So
that was right when it came out.
Yeah. So he had the app. He'd bring it over and we'd watch the videos on the app. And I think one of them was he dove deep into the butterfly sweep. And so I think that was one of your old instructions.
That would have been guard sweeps. That would have
Yes.
been the second app I ever released for iPhone. Those were good days. I remember I released that, and it was the first jiu-jitsu app on the platform. And for one day, my app was higher ranked than the ESPN app. Uh, they quickly rectified that with massive amounts of advertising and being ES bloody PN.
Right, right.
But for one day, I kicked ESPN's ass.
Oh, I would have screenshot that if I were you. That's awesome.
I think I have a screenshot. I think there is a screenshot of that somewhere. Uh, so okay, well that's. But the greater point here is that
This is.
being able to train at home is a huge luxury, and it's sometimes a lifesaver. I'm sure you've run into other people who've come up with that same solution
Oh
that you
yeah.
came up with.
Yeah, yeah. And so actually the gym that the only gym I've ever trained at, Magic, started in another friend's basement because there was so this was late '06, I think. And so I got into jiu-jitsu. There were no black belts in the mid-Michigan area. And so there was a purple belt that ran this gym. And that's where I went back and started training. And I met my friend Matt Linsemeyer. We started as white belts together. And it was at that gym that, I could only get in one night a week. And so I'd grab friends and come to the basement and train on off nights, and we ended up leaving that purple belts gym because of reasons. There were a lot of good reasons that we left. And Matt was driving 90 minutes one way, 3 days a week to train with the black belt.
Yeah.
And then he would come back and we'd train in his basement, and he'd give us what he'd gotten from the black belt. It was Ryan Ferenzi at the time, who was, I think, the first black belt in Michigan. So Matt got his blue belt from Ryan, and when it got to the point that there were like 30 people crammed into his basement and cars up and down the street, and his neighbors wondering, what kind of crazy drug deals or swinger parties are going on in there. Him and his wife were like, we should probably get a commercial location. This is getting too big. So I trained in my basement on the off times, but then Magic BJJ really started in his basement. And now here we are today. I don't do much training at home today because I have keys to the gym, which is like 5 minutes away, and all of that stuff. But in the early days, and during the pandemic, during 2020, 2021, when things were shut down, it was a lifesaver.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think the minimum square footage is for a good home gym?
I got away with like 10 by 10, really.
Okay.
Depends on how many people. I had I'm looking over the corner of the basement because we've been in this house for 20 years, and it's right over to my left is where the home gym was before, kids took it over and junk. I had a 10 by 10 square of mats, and I had some other unconnected mats that I could arrange.
Pad the walls.
Yeah, basically pad the walls. So I probably had 12 by 10, 13 by 10 at the most. And we would have 2 or 3 people down here, and we'd take turns drilling. And then if we actually rolled, if we had 3 people, one person was watching the walls to make sure we didn't slam into them. That was doable. That was doable. If you're not doing anything too crazy, I think that you can get away with that.
Yeah. It may be apocryphal, but it's been said that the reason that so many jiu-jitsu schools, the story is, in Brazil, nobody does takedowns. And the reason people don't do takedowns is because the gyms are so small that there just isn't the room. You couldn't have more than a couple people training at a time because they'd be planting feet in each other's heads.
Right.
But that's one reason that the emphasis is on the ground. I think that's probably, obviously training in a super small space, it's much harder to do takedowns. And now that there's more money in the sport, the gyms are probably a lot larger. But it's kind of an interesting just so origin story.
Yeah. I wonder if that's along the same lines of Aleo inventing leverage or something like that. We have a judo program at our school too, and a lot of almost all of our judo coaches train jiu-jitsu as well. And they always say BJJ is basically just judo. I'm like, okay, fine. We'll admit it. Fine.
Sure. I mean, you can start at judo and end up at jiu-jitsu. A lot of it really depends on what the incentives are. And Robert Drysdale has made excellent points about how the evolution of the rules over time drove what the sport looked like. If you go watch Kato versus Helio from the 1950s, it looks like a long judo match. There's clearly Helio's trying to stay on his feet, and they're trying to foot sweep each other, and then eventually Kato, I think it's an Uchimata, does a couple of Uchimatas, but it looked like judo. If you watched any random 10 seconds of that match, the odds are very good that you're going to come up with the impression that is judo. And it was the rules as they started. I mean, in judo, if you throw me for ippon, the match is over. You've won.
Right.
But now if we just give 2 points for a takedown, that's kind of the same rough number of points as passing the guard, or, and the mount is even more points. The sport is going to reflect what you're incentivizing. It'd be like at baseball, I don't really follow baseball, but imagine that each time you stole a base, it was the equivalent of a home run. The game would change.
Oh, yeah.
Right. It would be very different game and very different strategies. And all you've done is change one rule. If you steal one base, it's a home run. That would change the shape of the sport. And so I think, again, Robert Drysdale made a pretty good argument when he was on my podcast about a year ago.
Yeah.
The rules drove the form of the sport.
I caught that episode. That was a really, really good one, too. Yeah, no, I can definitely see that. I don't know anything about gyms in Brazil, so I don't know if the small gyms had anything to do with the takedowns either, but my guess is probably the rule set more than anything else. Yeah.
So based on your time of training in at home gyms and in garages, and both in yours and in your what would eventually grow into your jiu-jitsu clubs, Jim, what would you suggest to people who are trying to train on their own to get better, or spend a large amount of training on their own? Maybe they go to a club once a month, maybe they go to a club once a week, but they're doing 2 or 3 sessions at home. How would you suggest they structure that training to get better?
How would I suggest they structure their own training to get better when they don't have time or the means to be at a club on a regular basis? That's a really good question. I think that it's the same way as I was coming up through the ranks. It's the same way, and it's the same way I still structure my own training to try to get better. As I like to pick very small, definable, attainable goals and focus on those each session, right? So instead of, for example, working on like, okay, I'm going to drill this one technique over and over again. Let's say a scissor sweep, right? So instead of like drilling an entire scissor sweep over and over and over and over and over again, I would break that into pieces and parts. Like I would work on setting up my grips first for that scissor sweep, right? And maybe doing that with some resistance. I might be talking about gamifying things in a way. But the first step is you have to set up your grips, right? You have to get your connection with your opponent. And then once you're able to do that reliably, then you have to bring them up off their base a little bit, right? And so then that's the next step. So my next thing I'd worry about is, okay, now I can get my grips reliably. Now I need to figure out how to get underneath them and get them off their base. And then once they're off their base, you can finish a sweep. So, I would say set small, attainable, easily definable goals and work toward those every session until you're satisfied, and then set the next easily attainable goal, right? Because there's so much information out there about jiu-jitsu now that if somebody's going to be training at home with a friend during their off time or whatever, you can get lost in it.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I think we should break it down to, okay, what What is it I'm trying to get better at? What's the first step that I have to accomplish to get better at this thing? And then let's work that first step ad nauseum under some sort of resistance, not like full on just sparring, but some sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Some sort of like modified resistance until I can do that reliably, and then take the next piece and the next piece and the next piece.
Yeah, a journey of 1,000 techniques begins with the first part of the first technique, I guess.
Right. So like when I started jiu-jitsu, the second time, not in the mid 90s when I tried it for that year, but my journey started in late 06 because my in-laws live in Southern California. My wife's whole family lives out there. And my sister-in-law's husband knew a guy who was a Hickson black belt that was teaching out of a local boys and girls club 3 mornings a week. And my brother-in-law says to me, hey, I know you're into this martial arts stuff. If you've heard about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, blah, 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 let's see if I could get you an invite to this guy's club, as long as you're here visiting. And I was like, yeah, sure. And I went in there and just got murdered. Like, super nice guys, but I thought that maybe that year of jiu-jitsu I did a decade or more ago I was going to somehow remember that and like be any good, because I was still doing martial arts, and I wasn't.
You just don't understand my mentality, bro. I get on the mats and I see red.
Right. Exactly. Apparently I didn't see enough red, but Craig Husband was the guy's name, and Craig was kind enough to say, you know what, Mike, you're super interested in training martial arts and combat sports. Like, if you do jiu-jitsu in Michigan and you come back here to visit, you're always welcome back at my school. And that was it. It was like, I got to find a place in Michigan to train. So I would, every 6 months or so, we'd go visit California, and I would take these. Craig like taught very conceptually, and it all felt like magic to me. Like, how can this guy who's not any bigger, he's actually probably smaller than me, he's definitely older than me, how can he just feel like wrought iron when he grabs me? And like, I can't do anything and I can't move him, and he just does whatever the hell he wants to me. And so like, I was taking these concepts that he was showing me, and I was training in Michigan, and I'd go to class in Michigan, but like for myself, I'd like, okay, we're doing whatever we're doing in class here, but I'm going to focus on this concept I learned last month.
For example, what? Do you remember any of those concepts specifically that you worked on?
Yes. And it's a huge cornerstone of my game right now, is like maintaining your base.
Okay. Like
not being moved if you don't want to be moved. And, it has to do with hip alignment relative to your partner or opponent, right? And so, a silly little trick that I learned from Craig, like at the outset, was when you're in someone's closed guard, about like curling your hip bone up underneath you, right? So instead of posturing up by arching your back and lifting your chest to the ceiling, you keep your spine aligned and then you curl your hip bone up and forward, which makes it a lot harder for somebody to pull you over, right? To break your posture. And so I remember, like, as a mid-white belt coming to classes, and like, that was my focus. Like, we could be working on like spider lasso guard to triangle setup, and I'd be like, okay, that's fine, we'll do this, but I'm going to make sure my hips are aligned so this guy can't break me down. And that's kind of what I was getting at when I was talking about how you should focus when you're training at home. Like, that really helped me, taking these goals. I had these goals, and I would apply this concept to everything I did until it became like second nature. Right. And I mean, I'm not unbeatable. I'm not some world beater. I'm not like a world champion or anything, but I'm really freaking hard to sweep. And it's because of like that stuff I learned as a white belt that I just like drilled super deep into. And that's what I tell our students to do. Like, there's always the next new shiny thing. Well, how deep have you drilled into what, into these fundamentals. How deep have you drilled into making sure you're in alignment all the time, and that you've got base, and that you're not laying flat on the mat, you're kind of propped up on your side instead. Like those are things I think that you should really focus on, that are going to help all of your jiu-jitsu. That's going to help all those new shiny techniques that you want to learn off of Instagram. And now I'm on my soapbox, Stephan, so I apologize.
Oh, good. Soap away. I agree that you can go kind of insane chasing the new shiny thing. And I mean, I've been a black belt for, my God, something like 15 years. I'd have to do the math. And when I watch high-level competitors train now, it's daunting, because when you just watch it the first time, you're like, or I'm like, I understand about 50% of what's going on here, but what the hell? I started jiu-jitsu in the late 80s, early 90s. I should know everything, right? Well, no, you actually can't.
Right.
Especially if you're not able to train for 5 hours a day, because number one, you're 22 years old. Number two, you're cranking growth hormone and testosterone and a million other drugs to give you that endurance to be able to train and to heal from all that training. So it's tremendous fun to try and keep up, and I'll definitely do it, because I want to understand. Like, okay, I'm not going to be able to master this. I don't know. What was I playing with today? Today I was playing with following up from the 411 to expose the heel, using a series of forward rolls and inversions to access the heel in different ways and end up in different leg locking positions. I don't think this is going to become my forte. I reserve the right to come to you in a month's time and say, I've been working on only this, and now nobody can hide their heel from me when I'm in 411. Maybe that'll happen. But I just wanted to understand an exchange that I'd seen happening at a high level. And it's fun, right? That is fun, to chase the shiny object. At the same time, I think depending how you define what the fundamentals are, and the fundamentals change over time, to work, it depends what you define as fundamentals, right? The fundamentals of base are universally applicable. What a fundamental technique is, that changes over time. So it's trying to balance the two things, trying to work on the things that are evergreen, and then have a bit of fun chasing the bright shiny object.
Right. I mean, if jiu-jitsu is not fun, why are we doing it? I mean, I'm certainly not
for self-defense and self-offense.
Yeah. God, if I'm having to use my jiu-jitsu to fight at this point in my life, I've made some really poor choices.
Yeah. We can quote
some things.
Kurt Osiander there. Son, you fucked up a long time ago.
Yeah. Yes, God love him. Yeah. Oh my God. Yes. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, no, I agree with you. All of that stuff is super fun. But I think somebody who's training at home or newer to the sport should really get, my opinion is, you should really get a solid foundation first, because those shiny things aren't going to work for you as well unless you know, understand the body mechanics behind them, which I think is going to come from that solid foundation.
So you're talking about base. When you use the word base, what do you mean? Because different people use the same word and they mean very different things.
Right. So I think base is the ability to maintain your balance and your alignment and utilize a structure like it's usually the floor, right? To allow your body to be able to absorb or to impart kinetic energy into your opponent, right? So, for example,
sounds like a very Bernanke phrase.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I kind of cribbed some of it from him, to be honest. But it like that phrase, the way Rob described it, really spoke to me, and in the way that I learned base and the way I use it, right? So take, for example, like I'm laying flat in my back and somebody's going to pin me in side control, right? Well, if I'm flat in my back and my feet aren't connected to the ground, I don't really have any base because I don't have anything to absorb. If you and I are rolling and you go to take side control and I'm flat, I don't have anything to absorb that weight. Like my rib cage is going to take it. It's going to suck. I'm going to be immobile, right? If I just kind of tilt my hip up a little bit, take my outside leg and post it on the mat and drive just a little bit to my side, right? I may not be getting out right away with that, but now I've got base that can absorb that force, that your weight on me, and I can make myself more comfortable down there and not, have my diaphragm getting crushed or my neck getting wrenched or anything like that. And then I've got base, and I've got something I can work from to effect an escape.
So by planting one foot and driving off of that foot, you're able to affect that turn as opposed to lying there like a starfish.
Yes.
Allowing them to put all their weight essentially into your diaphragm and choke
Right.
you. Well, we should talk about the flip side of that because I know you're a big fan of pressure once you get to the top. So let's turn that on its head. If you wanted to, you've just been in a dogfight. The guy's tried to pass your guard. You've managed to use guard retention to stop that. Finally, you catch him in a sweep. You end up in their guard, and you pass that guard, and now you're in a control position. Let's say side control, but it could be anything that you want. What specifically are you doing to become heavy as hell on that person?
I am taking away almost all my posts from the mat and putting all my weight on that person. So side control is the best way for me to describe it. And when I teach it, I usually use side control. And my body position is almost the same if I were on the bottom of that as I am when I'm on the top. Like and so here's what I mean by that, right? So when we're on the bottom of side control, we tend to angle ourselves, right? The best thing to do, in my opinion, is kind of tend to angle yourself toward your opponent, and your hip comes out a little bit, like you're starting a shrimp or a hip escape, right? And that way you can post on that back leg, and you've got this structure with your skeleton that you've created that can hold that weight. When I'm putting weight on somebody, I'm almost doing the exact same thing, except it's flipped over. So I'm on top and side control. I want to have my toes on the mat. I don't want my knees on the mat. I don't want my elbows on the mat. I have to be connected somehow to the mat, or else I'm just floating on this person and they can throw me over. But my toes stay on the mat, right? My elbows come off. My knees come off. My hip kicks up just a little bit, just a tad. And I kind of turn just a little bit so I can focus all of my weight into the smallest point possible. And I usually like to put that in the diaphragm because that's the most uncomfortable. And come on, let's be honest, pressure tapping people is fun. and so, and that's how
you're blading your body a little bit so that you're using the edge of your ribs as opposed to the front of your rib cage.
Yes.
On your diaphragm. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. And it's like I'm not doing a plank. My hips are up just a bit, and I'm
piking
kind of
down into them.
Yeah, piking down, but not too much, because if you pike up too much, you're unstable, right? It's just a tad and just a little bit of drive, and you just find that diaphragm and scoop inward. But it's almost the same position that you're doing if you're defending it on the bottom, if you're defending it the way I learned to defend it. And that's the way, I'm always looking for, and I don't think I'm ever going to find the universal equation for jiu-jitsu. But that's about as close to the universal equation as I found, is how that one position, that one shape you create with your body is in so many different parts of jiu-jitsu. And it's almost the same when you're on the bottom defending as you are when you're on the top. And whoever gets there first and can maintain it is usually going to be the one to get what they want out of that exchange. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I like the description that you used. I remember in the Grappling Concepts course, which I put out quite a while ago, I was talking about that you can choke somebody at the neck, but you can also choke them at the diaphragm. It's much harder to choke. I mean, if I'm 600 pounds and I park myself on your pectoral muscle, it's going to be hard for you to breathe. But if we're roughly the same weight, I can camp out on your upper chest all day long. And if you have any kind of toughness or experience with pressure, it's not going to bother you that much. But if I shift downwards a little bit onto your diaphragm, now that's basically your solar plexus. There's a big horizontal muscle that cuts your body in half. It separates your heart and your lungs above your diaphragm and pretty much everything else below it. If you can kind of, I try to think of it as paralyzing that muscle or squishing it so hard that it can't contract, you're actually stopping the person from breathing effectively. And so you can choke at the diaphragm as well as at the neck. That was a big revelation for me when I figured that one out. That was, and if you keep that in mind, then it's pretty easy to come up with a heavier side control. It's pretty easy to come up with a heavier kezakatami. It's easy to come up with a heavier knee mount because it tells you where you need to apply pressure if you want to be a real prick. I guess with the knee mount, you're being a real prick if you're plunking yourself right in the solar plexus.
Right. No, for sure. Well, one of our coaches at Magic, something he said a couple months ago has stuck with me. He said you can control people. There's 3 different ways to control people. You can misalign their spine, like pin them and control them on the ground. Misalign their spine, limit their movement, or hinder their breathing. And it's best to use more than one at the same time, right? So
when you say misalign their spine, could you give an example?
Sure. Like a hard crossface at the temple when you're on top side control. By hard, I don't mean like hitting them with it. I mean taking their head from, aligned here to over this way, right? Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, I do that. I like to find the diaphragm and squish that too, so there's maximum discomfort. Yeah, and so that really stuck with me. When our friend Robert said that, I was like, oh, yeah, that's something I'm going to carry with me. So you limit their movement, you can misalign their spine, or you can
limit their breathing.
Yeah. You can misalign a spine too on the other end too. Like obviously a cradle is misaligning someone's spine, or taking their knees and like while they're flat in their back, taking the knees and pushing the other way so the spine's kind of twisted. Not necessarily doing a twister, but any way to kind of make it biomechanically more difficult for somebody to engage their hips and move.
Yeah. I think that's a lesson I actually learned from weightlifting. Is the idea, especially at an elite level, which I was not, but I was talking to and listening to elite powerlifters like Chris Duffin, Brandon Morgan, or Stuart McGill. They really emphasize the idea of spinal integrity, that your spine can take a tremendous amount of weight so long as it's lined up in that natural curve. But if it's kinked, right, if you're deadlifting and you're hunched over, then your vertebral discs, the intervertebral discs, are going to be getting abnormal pressure. But the worst is if you're deadlifting and you're hunched over and now your spine is changing shape with all that loading. So the idea of maintaining spinal integrity above everything else is pretty important. And when I think back to the times that I've injured my back, for sure, there was heavy loading on the spine, and I wasn't super conscious of it not changing shape under load, right? Like once you set that spine, you don't want it to move. So really, jiu-jitsu makes me very aware of how we're trying to not do great things for each other's spine, and especially the neck. Oh man, the poor neck.
Oh God, I know. I kinked it. We were in California for the holidays, and I trained twice with some friends out there, and I kinked it during a roll, and I'm still feeling it a week and a half later. So I'm with you there. I don't like people messing with my neck. That was my own fault, not my friend's fault. I hung out for too long thinking I could weather the storm when my 51-year-old neck said otherwise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we have to acknowledge that it's possible to be in a 51-year-old body with like an 85-year-old neck as well,
Yes.
depending. To quote Indiana Jones, it's not the years, it's the mileage.
Yeah, true. I think you and I have a few miles on those necks.
Yeah. Uh, how have you managed to, other than refusing to tap uh, when you're in a kinked up position, uh, what have you been doing to be able to continue training for so long? Because I'm sure Tank Sudo and just life in general also put miles on the body.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Strength training is key for me. Number one, to something. For me, I'm not an exercise physiologist, so I don't want to talk out of my depth about anything like that. Just because I'm a black belt in jiu-jitsu doesn't mean I know a whole lot about all these other things, right?
Oh, come on. We got to
I
get to your solution to the Israel-Hamas crisis,
God,
Russia-Ukraine, uh, the next Bitcoin to go big, and epidemiology. But we'll
oh,
save that. We'll save that for later.
we've learned that we're all experts in epidemiology over the
Yeah.
past 3 years, right? So, all right, I'm not going to go there. Uh, so I'm not an exercise physiologist, so I don't want to talk out of my depth, but I do know that when I don't strength train consistently, I tend to get injured.
Hmm.
And in the past, uh, I have let my strength training go because jiu-jitsu is so much more fun,
Hmm.
right? I don't necessarily, if I had to choose jiu-jitsu for the rest of my life or weightlifting, um, my mind and heart would want to do jiu-jitsu, but my body probably should do weightlifting because I'd like to be able to lift myself off the toilet when I'm 80. So
Yeah.
that's probably the healthier way to go. But if I don't stay, lift some iron every couple or a couple times every week, I tend to get injured. Um, and then like I have to limit the amount of jiu-jitsu I do
Yeah.
because
You're healing from an injury.
right, or like in general I feel like I have to limit the amount of jiu-jitsu I do to avoid
Oh,
getting
okay.
injured, because we say, everyone says jiu-jitsu is a gentle art, and I think that's a misnomer, or people aren't thinking of it. It doesn't mean what they think it means, right? Like, I think it's a gentle art in the sense of you can subdue somebody without really causing a ton of damage to
Yes.
them. But jiu-jitsu training is not gentle
Yeah.
necessarily. And so, like, I'm 4 days a week jiu-jitsu, 4 days a week of jiu-jitsu, 2 days a week of lifting. Seventh day, I rest. Video games and pizza or
Yeah.
whatever. But I've as I get older, like if I try to tack more on, or if like, oh, I'm going to compete in Master Worlds this year, so I'm going to do 2 a days, and I'm going to lift in the morning and do jiu-jitsu at night. That's just a recipe for me for injury. Like that will happen. I
Yeah.
will get hurt. Um, and then, I was talking about this with a buddy of mine who just started about 6 months ago, and he's in his mid 40s. And we talked about like the importance of cherry picking your training partners
Hmm.
too. Like, he was talking about somebody that he rolled with that probably outweighed him by 80 or 90 pounds, big guy. And my friend just was like, I felt really bad, but I had to tell him no, because I was just too whipped. Like, I don't think I could have handled it. I think I would have gotten hurt. And I told him, I said, you don't ever need to feel bad. Like, it's your body,
Yeah.
like if you're not down for a roll with somebody because they're too big or they're too rough, or that they like to go hard and you're not ready for that, then you can always say no. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. There certainly is a lot of pressure to do it, though,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Especially at some clubs and from some instructors, and then usually the worst person is yourself. No, I should be able to go with anybody. And certainly that's, as I'm continuing in this jiu-jitsu journey, despite a lot of mileage, I'm becoming much more selective about who I roll with. And I know I would make faster progress if I rolled with more people. But on the
Yeah.
other hand, the odds of injury go way up, in which case all progress stops. So if I had to get as good as I could in a 1 week increment, I should probably just train with everybody, the toughest guys possible, and roll the dice. And I'll recognize that at the end of the week, there's, I don't know, pick a number, a 50% chance that I'll be injured. But if I'm not injured, I will have improved more in that 1 week. But that's not sustainable in the long run.
Right.
The risk to reward, and the short-term risk to reward and the long-term risk to reward calculations really change as you go up through the decades.
Yeah. For sure. Chris Hodder, we're affiliated under him and known him for several years, and I consider him and Melissa friends. And I think he just turned, I'm going to out Chris, he's going to listen to this and come to Michigan and choke me. I think he just turned 59. His birthday is like late December. And so the last time, not the last time I saw him, last time I rolled with him was about a year ago around the holidays. And I went out there to visit family and popped in to train with Chris. And it was just before the holidays and nobody else showed up. So just him and I, and we rolled for an hour. And it was a ton of fun. And he said to me after, he's like, yeah, I really enjoy doing that because I don't, I do all these seminars all over the world, and I really don't roll with people at the seminars because it's too risky. I'm getting too old, and there's too many young guns who are looking to say they tapped Chris Hodder, and so like I felt like, okay, cool. That means I'm a safe partner, I guess, because we just rolled for an hour. But I also took that to heart. I'm like, well, look, if this guy who's one of the dirty dozen that a ton of people look up to can do that, right, and recognizes that for him to do jiu-jitsu for another 10 years, he has to do that. Why don't I do that?
Yeah.
Like, you can train hard with partners that you trust and that are safe. That doesn't mean you just have to pick everybody at the open mat.
Yeah, it also doesn't mean you're never going to get injured. It just means the frequency of getting injured are lower, especially if you do silly stuff like fight through cranked positions. I think that's, a tap can mean, you have me in a submission, but a tap can also mean, man, this not quite a submission is just irritating my insert body part here. It is irritating my shoulder, is irritating my neck. And I'm getting, in the last couple of years, I've gotten much better about tapping out to just uncomfortable positions that I know from many, many, many previous rounds I could suffer through. I'm pretty good with pain tolerance if I have to be. I've learned this many different ways in my life, but being able to distinguish between, the pain of cardio, where you can push yourself pretty hard. It really is not pleasant, but you're unlikely to have a lasting injury there other than, the slight taste of blood in your mouth versus the pain of suffering through, some weird head and arm choke that's not quite right. It's not quite sealing your arteries, but is definitely kinking your neck.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. So last week, over the holidays, when I told you I kinked my neck because I thought I could suffer through this position and get out, it was totally on me. It has nothing to do with my partner. He's a great partner. I was just being stupid for whatever reason at that point in time. And so then I went the next night in California to train with another friend at another gym at their open mat. And I only knew him, and there was a room of like 8 or 10 black belts at this open mat, and I rolled with a whole bunch of them, and I played it smart. Like the one guy, he swept me and got on top and was working this high mount and didn't have my arm, but like he was basically mother's milking me, and my neck was turned and I tapped. And not really, but I don't know how else to describe it. Basically my head was turned sideways because his sternum was on my cheek, and I tapped, and he's like, "Oh, are you okay? I don't think I had anything." I said, "I know, but my neck is tweaked from last night and I wasn't getting out, and you you had me dead to rights, and I wasn't good. It's not worth, visiting an open mat and getting injured. And, he was cool with it. He said, oh yeah, I totally get that. He's about my age. So, so there's no harm in that. No. And I think there's too many, I think it stifles people's learning because they get injured, because there's this pressure to, tough it out. You have to be tough to do jiu-jitsu. Well, jiu-jitsu makes you tough. And part of being tough is knowing when to call it quits so you can train the next day.
Yeah. The mother's milk. My God, what a disgusting submission. There was my first introduction to it was a guy at the club I trained at who was big guy, a little bit flabby, very hairy. This is back in the day before you wore rash guards. You just wear the jiu-jitsu gi over bare skin. And he would open his gi, and then he would just basically hug your head and pull your face into his hairy, somewhat muscular, somewhat flabby chest. And I saw him tap every single higher belt at the club with it. And I saw him do it, and I was like, this is not going to happen to me. Because afterwards I see people like picking chest hair out of their teeth.
Oh my God.
And so yeah, he started getting it on me, and I got out because I had pre-planned my escape. But if I had not done that pre-planning, going by the there's no way this is happening to me, he would have caught me with it for sure. Now it's making a comeback. My God, all the techniques that should be condemned to the dustbin of history. Because part of the answer is when you're getting smothered. If especially think of it, if you've got somebody's pulled their lapel over your face and you can't really breathe through it because it's wet, is to open your mouth more. The further you open your mouth, the more surface area there is for air to pass through. And it sort of works as well for mother's milk. But now you're opening your mouth as wide as you can with this flabby chest coming into your mouth.
Well, oh my God, I know. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, that's so terrible. Oh, I'm going to need to use mouthwash and take a shower after this conversation now.
Excellent.
You've done your job, Stephan.
I have lowered the tone of this conversation.
Yes. Oh, that's awesome.
So how you're teaching these days as well, right?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Okay. How are you structuring what you're teaching? Are you teaching a big open class, or are you teaching mostly a certain range of people?
That's a really good question. So we have, there used to be a day when I had like a regular class I taught at Magic, at our gym, Magic BJJ. We have so many coaches now that I don't have a regular class. So I'm showing up and I'm helping out where I can. I'm doing, I have been, and I feel very fortunate to be doing this. I've been teaching seminars. I did a bunch last year. I have another one scheduled in a couple weekends in Flint, Michigan. And when I teach, so I can't answer your question when it comes to like the day-to-day classes at Magic, because again, I don't have, I fill in where I'm needed at this point in time. But when I teach seminars, I've been focusing a lot on base, because I'm finding that these, some of these concepts that I learned back in the day from Craig, the Hickson black belt back in California, are things that people aren't necessarily familiar with. A lot of the students coming up that around Michigan, at least around the people I've been teaching seminars to, aren't super familiar with the this concept of base and how to think about it this way and how to position your body this way. So like if I were to do a seminar tomorrow, people who I'd never taught before, that'd be my curriculum. I've got this particular set of things that I do to help people understand base. And we start on our feet, and then we go down to the ground in all these different positions, and we talk about how the similarities in all these positions, like you might not, like the side control top and bottom that we talked about, you might not think about how one shape you create with your body on the bottom is almost the same shape you create on top to maintain your base and give pressure. And so that's the way I like to teach. Of course, like not everybody is, when I'm teaching regular classes, I don't do that all the time because we've got like whatever technique we happen to be working on that week or that month. And, but if I can interject like my base stuff into that, like I almost always do.
Because you're an evangelical of base.
Basically, yeah. Basically. Yeah.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, I know. It was pretty bad. We're both dads. Dad jokes are our forte, right?
Yeah.
So does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. And I think it's fair that what you're teaching at a seminar is sort of a self-contained module, as opposed to, hey, I mean, we've all been to seminars where it's like, here's a reverse triangle from the guard, and here's this cool armbar from the top, and now we're gonna do a takedown. I think jiu-jitsu is getting better now. That's less common than it used to be. That used to be very common, both as a class structure and as a seminar structure. And I think people are beginning to realize that, at the very least, teach 3 or 4 techniques that somehow connect. Like that, people may take that as an obvious thing, but I swear to God, it wasn't obvious 20, 25 years ago that if you teach a bunch of stuff, that it should all be sort of connected.
Right. And 17 years ago when I started, it wasn't obvious either. So it's in recent memory that people have started to do that, my book.
Speaking of the evolution of jiu-jitsu, how have you fared during the ascendancy of no-gi? I don't know if you can say that no-gi is now more popular than gi. It probably is for watching. I mean, I think for, watching who's number one or Abu Dhabi versus watching the Mundials, I think more people watch the no-gi competition. In terms of training, I'm not sure. I think maybe it's roughly 50-50 or maybe a little bit more skewed towards no-gi. What's your take on that in Michigan and traveling around to the clubs that you do?
I think you're probably right about 50-50. I know that our gym is 50-50 now. Like we used to be heavily skewed towards the gi, and we had a couple of no-gi classes, and like you wouldn't see much cross-pollination, right? When the no-gi guy came into your gi class, you'd be like, hey, are you a new student? Do you need help signing the waiver? You'd be like, no, I'm here every Wednesday and Friday for no-gi. You just don't come. I'm like, oh, okay. But we've implemented a structure where we have 1 week gi, 1 week no gi, on and off.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So it basically forces everybody to learn to be adept at both. So there's still a dedicated no-gi night, and there's one night there's a dedicated gi no matter what week it is. But the main the big classes that everybody comes to, every school's got like their nights that almost everybody's there, right? The most populated, and those we rotate. So this week we're gi, next week will be no-gi. And when I travel, I think it's about 50-50.
Yeah.
I think it's about 50-50. When I teach seminars, I'm always in the gi because I want some of what I do is easiest when you have a cloth to grab, easiest to understand. Like it can be done, of course, no gi, but I think it's easier for people to understand when you can reach out and grab someone's lapel with it. Of
course, you're a reverse upside down spider guard specialist, where you
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't. Yeah, I can't fight without clothes on. I don't fight naked people. What are you talking about?
Well, the hill that I will die. Back in the day, there was an argument to be made that no-gi people who just wanted to compete in Abu Dhabi, say, should train in the gi because there were higher levels of training partners available in the gi. So, yes, you had to adapt to the grips and stuff, but if you really wanted to train with better black belts, more black belts, you should do gi because that's where most of the better black belts and the more black belts were. I don't think that's true anymore. So I think there is an argument now that if you want to be a no-gi specialist, you can probably train mostly no-gi. But if your goal is jiu-jitsu as a martial art and self-defense, then I don't think there's any excuse. You have to do both. I mean, Michigan gets cold in the winter. People are not running around wearing board shorts in the middle. Well, maybe they're on a ton of really good drugs if they're running around in board shorts in the middle of winter. Most people are going to be wearing a jacket, a shirt, or they might not be. In which case, you need to know how to control them both with the gi and without the gi.
Right. And I mean, I really feel the more I do both gi and no gi, I really feel there's not that much difference between the two. Like the only thing that I don't feel, a couple things that I don't feel that I can pull off in no gi, obviously collar chokes, right? Unless you're going to be that guy that grabs the rash guard, right? I remember back in '94 when I trained for that year, that little upstart place, we were choking each other with our t-shirts, and man, that was not fun. That
were you just using the edge of it, or were you like bundling it up so that you pull all the material up from the back? So that you get a great big rope.
Just using the edge. Like, ooh. I mean, it was not, and a lot of t-shirts were wrecked. And I mean, I think it was so long ago, I'm sure some people bundled it up and like knew how to do it properly. But, you know, I was a transplant from karate who was trying this jiu-jitsu thing. And like half of us didn't know. We just like, oh, it's a collar, grab it, choke. And lots of t-shirt burns going on and lots of wrecked shirts.
Yeah. Why do you have noose-like scars on your neck? Oh, don't worry, baby. It's jiu-jitsu.
Right. It's some secret club you can't know. But I think
if I say it's David Carradine's martial art, that's too soon? That's probably tasteless. Not. Okay. Cut that out.
Okay. Don't cut it. Leave it in. It's too good. You know, I think though that most of what, with the exception of like lapel chokes and maybe some like spider guard stuff, you can do almost anything no gi that you can with a gi. Like a underhook and overhook and a monkey paw work just as well as grabbing cloth. And to be honest, my arthritic fingers hurt less on no gi weeks.
Yeah. I think if you really were determined, you could come up with very, very different gi and no gi games. But most people who do both end up sort of having a very compatible game. I think Marcelo Garcia was a great example of somebody whose gi and no gi game were pretty identical. I call it 95% identical. Now, I mean, if you are a worm guard specialist and you're also competing in no gi, well, now you're going to need two different systems, which might mean that you're only half as good at each one. But by and large, if you're cross-training, you're going to quickly figure out that, okay, here are the things I can do in both of these, and I might need to make a slight modification, but I can still pull it off, and therefore I'm getting twice as many reps in with, I don't know, butterfly guard to X guard sweep to double unders pass. That's basically the same in both arts.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, no, I agree. I think you have to work really hard to differentiate the two that widely. I think, you know, some people just have a preference, and that's fine too. Like, whatever, you know, as long as you're training. I'm not, if we'd had this conversation 5 years ago, I probably would have stood on my hill for the gi and died on it. But now I'm like, it's all the same. Just keep grappling. That's all I care about.
What do you compete in mostly?
Gi. Yeah. Gi. I honestly don't compete in no gi. I don't trust my crappy knees with heel hooks.
Yeah.
Like I'll train them. I am not a great leg locker at all. I mean, if you look at my jiu-jitsu game, it's pretty freaking boring, right? Takedown, pass, pressure, attempt to submit, you know, or sweep, pass, pressure, attempt to submit. So, you know, my leg lock game is not super well or super advanced, I think is what I'm looking for. And my knees are jacked up. I've had multiple surgeries on the right knee. I inexplicably tweaked it last night doing nothing that should have tweaked it. So I don't, you know, I'll play heel hooks in the gym with people I trust, but I don't want to compete. I don't want somebody wrecking my ability to walk over a $5 medal. So
Yeah.
I'll stick with the gi typically.
Yeah. It's kind of terrifying to watch how long people will stay in heel hooks trying to heel slip or toe slip or just eat it to hope that their opponent gets bored, to hope that they run out of time. There's only 60 seconds left that I've got to eat this heel hook for. Like, that's really the purview of the 20-year-old who's never had knee surgery before. I don't think they're probably going to do it a second time.
I hope not. Although, did you see, which of the Meow brothers was it that had...
Oh my God, yeah, the toe hold from hell.
Yeah, oh my word. And then didn't he had surgery, and somehow he posted a video of his surgeon, like, showing, not of the surgery, but like flexing his knee and showing how much wiggle room they had because like his ACL was destroyed. Oh, it terrifies me.
Yeah, they're almost the poster kids, the poster boys for what not to do to your body. But they have been successful. It's also a survivor bias because somehow they've managed to continue functioning with only half the ligaments that the normal knee has, and they can still walk, or at least they can hobble out enough to pull guard.
Right. No, thank you. I can't. I started jiu-jitsu too late, and my joints are too wrecked already for any of that. Lest your listeners think I'm dissing leg locks, I'm not. I just prefer not to have my knees trashed for a medal.
Well, you're still training them, right? You're still aware of what's going on. You're not going to become super crazy high level unless you're willing to engage in those extended leg lock battles. And there's a way to do that more safely and less safely. There are ways to isolate that, and if you're training with sane people, but mistakes still happen.
Yeah.
So I think being able to taste it just enough to understand it and sort of be able to say, okay, I think I have the basics here, and I'm going to put this over on the shelf, and if I ever really need it, I'll pull it out. But I'm not going to go into an environment where it's basically begging for it.
Right.
I think that's probably a valid decision. Certainly, to the extent that I can bless your decision, I will.
Excellent. Yeah. I feel blessed. Although after a recent camp, I did add the shotgun ankle lock to my repertoire, and that's been a ton of fun. Yeah.
Did you manage to get the feel for it?
Yes. Yeah. And it's, oh my God. I was working with a partner.
It's such a bizarre footlock.
I know, and it's so tight. Like, I was working with a partner about my age, and he and I couldn't really finish because we're older and our joints are less pliable. Like, we couldn't really do the full finishing mechanic because it was so tight at the outset. Like, and I've been able to hit it on a couple training partners and rolling, and the same experience. They're like, that was so tight as soon as you clamped it on. So that'll be in my repertoire, hopefully, for a while. So
there are a couple different ways to do the shotgun ankle lock. Are you doing it? I don't know if you saw the video that I released with Rob Bernacki on my YouTube channel.
No, I haven't.
I'm wondering if it's that style, or other people are making it more of the sort of the traditional. What is the mechanism if you have me in a shotgun ankle lock and you tap me with it, what is the mechanism by which I'm tapping? Why am I tapping?
You're tapping because I'm not only putting pressure on the ankle, but there's like, trying to remember, I think it was one of Bernacki's guys who taught it to me at a camp out in Atlanta in the beginning of December. Either one of Bernacki's guys or a guy that I know he had been to Rob's school for a week and like visited. So he's a big Rob fan. But so you're tapping because not only am I putting pressure on the Achilles, but there's like a torque to it as well that puts pressure on the Achilles and the knee, because I've got like the reverse De La Riva, and like my feet are switched around opposite of what a more traditional ankle lock might be. Is that
Yeah,
We're thinking the same technique.
that sounds like the same foot position. I'll
Oh, not.
when I put this episode onto Grapple Arts, I'll put the shotgun ankle lock video down below, so at least people can learn one way of doing the shotgun ankle lock.
Cool. I'll look for your video too on your YouTube with Rob, because I'd be interested to see if it's the same thing that this gentleman taught us.
You don't remember who it was?
Yeah. His name was Oliver Simic. He's a purple belt. He he'd obviously taken a really deep dive into this.
Shame
this
on you for
law.
learning something from a purple belt. You're a black belt.
I know.
Purple belts
so
have
bad.
nothing to teach us.
He had a lot to teach me about that ankle lock. It was a really good session. He's a very good teacher. So if he listens to this, shout out to you, my friend.
Awesome. Well, if people want to train with you, or if people want to bring you down for a seminar to learn what base is, how do they do that, Mike?
So you can find me on Instagram. It's Old Bastard BJJ.
Okay, that's pretty easy to remember.
Right. It wasn't easy to remember. Then a mutual friend of ours suggested I change it to something easy to remember. So I did so. So you can find me on Instagram. You'll get some jiu-jitsu, some dog pictures, some guitar stuff on there. It's basically my personal account that I switched the name to, but you can hit me up there. I'm in Lansing, Michigan, and I train at Magic Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and our website is magicbjj.com. If you're in Michigan and Lansing, you want to train, come drop in. We typically don't charge any drop-in fees. How did Matt, my friend who owns it, put it? He's like, yeah, we charge drop-in fees to assholes.
Yeah. So don't be an asshole.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're not an asshole, we won't charge you a fee. So just come in. Our schedule's online. Come check it out. Drop in. Open mat every Sunday at 11 a.m. Stephan, if you're ever in Michigan, feel free. I know you're on the other side of the continent across the border, but be awesome to have you someday.
That'd be lovely. I'm finally slowly beginning to reach a place where I can do more traveling. So that's something to look forward to.
Good for you.